After the devastating event of World War I, many countries suffered economically, even the United States, but from 1922, the US economy experienced a significant boom. Everyone longed for normalcy, and Republican presidential candidate Warren G. Harding had just the plan. With his campaign slogan being a return to normalcy, Harding won the 1920 election in a landslide.
America's present need is not heroics, but healing. Not nostrums, but normalcy. Not revolution, but restoration. Not agitation, but adjustment. Not surgery, but serenity. Not the dramatic, but the dispassionate. Not experiment, but equipoise. Not submergence in internationality, but sustainment in triumphant nationality.
President Harding's policies contributed greatly to America's economic prosperity during the 1920s. His isolationist policies angered many European countries, as he avoided forming economic and political alliances with them. And to rebuild the American economy, he raised brutal tariffs, known as the Fort Macumber Tariff of 1922, to protect U.S. manufacturers from foreign competition. Domestic goods became considerably cheaper, which encouraged spending, thus launching American businesses into riches. After Harding's death, Vice President and soon-to-be President Calvin Coolidge took his place. Coolidge, although not having done much, was very pro-business. He quotes, "After all, the chief business of the American people is business. They are profoundly concerned with producing, buying, selling, investing, and prospering in the world." Coolidge opted for a laissez-faire economy. He gave big and wealthy businesses tax breaks and more credit. This is what's called the trickle-down theory. Coolidge believed that doing such thing would benefit everyone in society and improve the economy as a whole. And it was this laissez-faire attitude that started the Roaring Twenties. With more money in their pockets, Americans wanted to spend it as much as they can. High demands were met quite quickly as mass production had just taken off. Henry Ford pioneered the use of the assembly line to mass-produce automobiles. With this rapid rate of production, prices went down and many Americans could now afford their own automobile. This was the start of America's love affair with the automobile. This was understandable, as such efficient form of transportation gave people access to more jobs. New industries were created from this love affair. As cities started to expand, new roads and highways were needed. Steel, petroleum, and rubber industries also received their profit. Like I said, Ford's use of the assembly line kick-started mass production. Different manufacturers took on this approach. Canned foods, sweets, toys, furniture, and other household gadgets were being produced at a rapid rate. That was enough for everyone. With money, time, and more freedom, Americans indulged themselves in leisure. As to avoid boredom, they looked for new forms of entertainment.
Cinema gained its popularity in the 1920s, and its greatest contributor was Hollywood. D.W. Griffith, America's pioneering filmmakers, filmed the first ever motion picture shot in Hollywood, in Old California, in 1910. A decade later, Hollywood became the world film's capital, a multi-million-dollar industry. Alongside Hollywood's booming popularity in the 1920s, cinema became a widespread form of entertainment in America. Larger movie theaters or movie palettes emerged in a major city, and small towns had their own theaters. Tickets were quite cheap, at only 25 cents. Going to the cinema became sort of a habit, as people of all ages would go as often as once a week. By 1927, silent films fell out of fashion with the release of The Jazz Singer, the first ever sound film, or as they were called, talkies.
From now on. You like that, Mama? I'm glad of it.
Radios, another fashionable form of entertainment, were on the rise. By the late 1920s, almost every American household has a radio. The entertainment they provide was broad ranging from news and serious stories to political speeches. Radios also present effective advertising spaces, unlike newspapers and magazines, which required active participation from consumers. The influence of radios developed a sense of shared national culture. Its entertainment and news was able to reach people from all corners of the US, thus creating common interests and ideas. With the aid of the radio, sports gained traction from all over the country. 1920s were regarded as the golden age of American sport. Among the most prominent were baseball, boxing, and college football. Baseball was especially widespread and became a national pastime. More people went to baseball games and more played baseball more than any other sport.
The fashion world, the Roaring Twenties reject the traditional European bad style of clothing. Hem-like shortened and clothes become loose. Women showed moleskin, wore high heels, and adorned themselves in the ravaged jewelry. Popular pieces of headwear among women were the crochet hats and headband. Coco Chanel was the most prominent fashion icon of the time. As for men, instead of the traditional stiff suit, they favored more soft and kosher style of suit, made from tweed. They sport offered shoes alongside bowler hat or straw hat. In the realm of art, new movements emerged. Many artists, musicians, and writers came from Europe. Perhaps the most celebrated even till today is Art Deco, which originated in Paris in the late 1910s. This style of visual art combined luxury materials like gold and platinum with stylish geometric patterns, giving out a modern look. Art Deco was used decoratively almost everywhere, like furniture, fashions, jewelry, and everyday objects. In architecture, the most iconic example is the Chrysler Building in New York. Additionally, celebrated on magazines cover across the country were the illustrious work of Joseph Christian Leyendecker. Critics are the creators of the Oral Coral Man. Leyendecker paints men in fashionable attire, well-kept hair, and other trendy accessory of the day. The man presents his painting would be regarded as a sex symbol of the 20th century. As one walks through the streets of Harlem in New York, lively jazz music and be heard all over. The greatest contributor were the African American community. Jazz originated from New Orleans in the late 19th century to the early 20th century. Is what Hillbillies popularized in the 1920s, as they were often performed in clubs to accompany an animated crowd of the dancers. The biggest star at that time was the trumpeter and singer Louis Armstrong. Another notable figure was singer Bessie Smith, nicknamed the Empress of the Blues. Furthermore, the African American community at that time experienced a powerful cultural revival of art, literature, and politics. The Harlem Renaissance was the name given to this movement, as its influence is most strongly felt in Harlem. One of the more famous names who lead the new Negro movement was Aaron Douglas. His paintings are stylish and colorful, based on traditional African art. The artwork displays powerful message of black life and struggle against inequality. Struggles like segregation, racial intolerance, and so much more.
The early 1920s experienced a surge of immigration to the north. Many were African Americans, Jewish people, Catholics, and more. In response, white Protestant nativists starting a revolt of the white supremacist group known as the Ku Klux Klan. They held rallies, marches, and priests headed across the country. At its peak in the 1920s, the organization has up to 4 million members. Searching for a better life, work, and maybe political participation, Black Americans start moving into the northern cities. They were met with exploitation and employment discrimination. This resulted in a civil rights movement in which Asa Philip Randolph founded the first predominantly black labor union known as the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. They drew attention to discriminatory hiring practices and working conditions for African Americans. Apart from unfair employment, Black Americans also experienced discriminatory housing practice. While the northern black population increased, they faced exclusion from white neighborhoods and were segregated. This created urban ghettos, which were overcrowded and had unsanitary living conditions.
The early 1920s saw a sharp rise in crime rates. This was a result of prohibition. Progressives have long advocated for the prohibition of alcohol because they believed it contributed to the decline of family financial resources, wife and child abuse, workplace accidents, and criminality. The temperance movement, born out of the Second Awakening in the early 19th century, advocated for abstinence from consumption of alcohol. And in the early 20th century, organizations like the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Anti-Saloon League led the temperance movement to its victory. With that, the 18th Amendment was ratified in 1919, thus making the manufacture, sales, and transport of alcohol illegal. This was the start of the Prohibition era. To get around Prohibition, drinkers would frequent underground saloons called speakeasies that sold alcohol illegally. Many of these established were disguised as jazz clubs. These illicit establishments got their supply of alcohol from bootleggers. Their jobs are to brew, transport, sell, and smuggle alcohol. Some people produce their own alcohol from potatoes or corn fermented in stills. They were called moonshine, hooch, or white lighting. At times, the liquids were low in quality. As many as 5,000 a year would die from drinking homemade liquor. This type of alcohol is still being produced today, mainly in Appalachia. Illegal alcohol was professionally transported by rum runners. They smuggled various kinds of imported alcoholic beverages on ships. Instead of reducing criminal activity through prohibition, the opposite happened. Street gangs, bootleggers, mobsters, and crime was rampant. Not only were bootleggers and mob found guilty, but ordinary people who sought booze were criminalized. Speakeasies were raided by prohibition agents, and thousands at that time would be arrested. Prohibition gave rise to organized crime in the U.S. Their presence expanded through the country into every major city. Large gangs got away with their crime as corruption among law enforcement and politicians prevailed. Authorities and powerful figures often took bribes from the mob. The bootlegging industry generated millions in revenue for some gangs. Many characters in the underworld rose to notoriety. In New York, Charles Luciano, or better known as Lucky Luciano, dominated the rum running business. He put together New York's most powerful Italian and Jewish mob. In Chicago, that was the infamous Al Capone. He seized control of the city's alcohol market by massacring his rivals. He and his gang became known as the Untouchables.
My funny Valentine.
In the dawn of the 1920s, consumer culture evolved alongside the launch of many new household gadgets and automobiles. Oftentimes, customers pay for these products in installments, gradually creating debt.
Meanwhile, banks gave offer installment loans so people could pay for their products. At the same time, everyone was getting richer and investing became an easy way to make more money. As well as loans for products, banks also gave loans to aid investments. Everyone had access to loans ranging from rich company owners to your average day wage earner. People would sell their Liberty bonds and mortgage their homes to pour huge sums of money into the stock exchange. What's more is banks are actually investing customer savings in the stock markets as well. By the midsummer of 1929, 300 million shares of stock were being carried on margin. Prices began to decline in September and early October. Then stock uncertainty starts. On October 24th, the market plummeted and everyone rushed to sell their stocks in order to save what little money they had left. And on October 29th, known as Black Tuesday, more than 16 million shares were sold. Panic broke out and people scampered to the bank to withdraw their funds, but felt that the banks had lost money in the crash as well. This led to the bank failures.